Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully, everybody's doing well. I'm sorry for the slight delay there. Um, my name is Christopher Lewis, and I am a cloud management specialist solutions engineer working at VMware. And I wanted to come today really to talk about VMware certifications. And when Linda asked me what I wanted to talk about, I said I'd do all the way up to VCAP, which is why the title is all the way up to VCAP. But I changed it to the what, the why, the when, and the how of VMware certifications up to VCAP. So hopefully you will find some interest in this. As I said, my name is Christopher Lewis. For those who don't know me, lead solution engineer, multi-cloud management. I'm also a hands-on lab lead captain, an education SME, which is where sort of this presentation really came from. And I have a sort of specialism in VMware cloud management and VMware SDDC in general. If you want to reach out via social media, then please feel free to do so at the Cloud Expert, also blog. And after Joe spoke about Peloton today, I'm also a Peloton user. So also there's a VExpert tag on Peloton, so feel free to join me on the ride sometime. Now, I guess what I'm also known for internally is being a badge collector, and these are some of the badges that I've collected over the last 18 months through my work with the sort of VMware education, VMware learning education SME program. So quite a lot of those have been a result of me writing exams. And if you are taking an exam, any of those exams, then my name will probably be on the blueprint somewhere. Feel free to ask questions in chat if you can. So I guess why take certification? So it's a good question, and it's a question that I get asked quite a lot around, do I need to be certified? And I think the answer to that is it really depends on your job role, your situation, your career progression, where you are. It does help, but it isn't necessarily the only thing that will help you in your career. So the benefits of being certified, is the challenge. Having to learn something, maybe something new, take that exam, see where you are in that level, and challenge yourself. Obviously, from a skills and knowledge perspective, it helps you increase your skills. And again, it could be something you're not typically using. It could be public cloud certifications. It could be Kubernetes certifications. It could be just the VMware certifications. These benefits not really just for VMware certifications. It helps you stand out from the crowd. So for someone looking for a new role or looking to progress their career, it shows that there's in my view, shows there's a dedication to what you're trying to learn and be an expert in, and can, at certain levels of your career, make you stand out. As an example, a VCDX certification will help you stand out from the crowd, and at the very sort of, if you like, pinnacle of your career, potentially. At the sort of the lower end of the your career, the VCP again helps you stand out from those people around you that aren't willing to make those difficult choices and potentially take those certifications. And again, it's situational, and work-life balance needs to be important as well. Recognition is always a good thing. You may get financially recompensed for taking certifications. You may be able to, again, get a better job because that job might require you to have those certifications. So it's always good to get that recognition. And one of the key things for me is personal growth. So the ability to grow in an area that I'm either currently in, so grow my knowledge, or expand into a growth area that I'm not necessarily too familiar with, but it gives me a litmus test, if you like, of where my skills are compared to where the industry wants them to be. So For those that are new to VMware certifications, I'm just going to quickly go over what the main certification paths are. Now, these may change, but at the moment, these are the certification paths as they are today. And then we'll talk about a little bit about my journey, and then we'll talk about how many people are actually certified. So there are 5 or 6 key tracks now from a certification perspective, and we're working on new ones all the time. But the main ones are DCV, EUC, cloud management and automation, and network virtualization. And security and application modernization have come on in the last sort of 12, 18 months. I've been involved in a little bit in those, but not too much, if I'm honest. But the data center virtualization obviously is one of the initial certification tracks that we had at VMware. And there are multiple levels in each of those certification tracks. So you have the VMware Certified Technical Associate, which is more of an operator level exam. I know how to use the product. I don't necessarily know a great deal about the intricacies of how that product works, but I know how to use it and raise support calls and sort of interact with that on a sort of day 2 operations perspective. You've then got the VCP, which is sort of like your administrative certification, sort of low-level administration, and I don't mean low-level in a derogatory way. I just mean it's the first certification that you get to sort of take in that perspective. So engineers, administrators take that exam. So again, across all of the sort of tracks, we have a VCP, and then we move into sort of what we class as the advanced certifications, but they're not necessarily difficult certifications. They just cover advanced feature sets. So don't feel worried about, I've taken my VCP, but I don't think I can take my VCAP, because that isn't necessarily the case. And in fact, I personally find the certified advanced professional exams easier than the VCP exams, because they're based on the stuff that I do every day, using the product, the sort of design scenarios, requirements, capture, that sort of stuff. But then also, again, using the product and how can I solve a problem with a product. So I find them a lot easier to do because they're sort of more hands-on, if you like. Once you've got your 2 VCAP certifications in that particular track, so deploy and design, you then get to sort of call yourself a VCIX, a VMware Certified Implementation Expert. Now that's a badge rather than an actual certification. So you do get a badge in your sort of Credly account, but it's not. You don't have to take an exam for that. That's just automatically given. And you have to have the VCIX or the equivalent of the 2 VCAPs to be able to take the VCDX, or at least submit your design for the VCDX. And the VCDX is very much a panel sort of discussion. You submit a design and then you go through the design with the panel, and then you answer some scenario questions live there in the panel and do some whiteboarding and so on and so forth. I haven't got that level, so I stopped at the VCIX level because for me it's not career relevant right now. It's a stretch goal, personal goal maybe, when life gets a little bit back to normal, but right now VCIX is where I am, and I think it's hopefully it's self-explanatory that well, it may not be. So to take the VCTA, you can take without any courses for most of those, and then the VCP you have to have a course, and to take the VCAPs you have to have a VCP, but you don't have to have a VCTA to take a VCP. So you can skip the operator level if you want to, and go straight into the administrative certifications, and then move upwards like that. But when you get past the sort of VCTA, you have to have the VCP to be able to sort of get the VCAP certification to be able to get the VCDX certification. And the reason there's 2 for application modernization is because there's 2 VCPs in that sort of track right now at sort of equal level, worth looking at. And I forgot this was a build. So as I said, increasing level of difficulty really from operators up to sort of VCDX. And then with that comes an increasing level of commitment, time commitment. And again, that's where you have to be on your own journey from a certification perspective. And I thought what I would do is it would be fun-ish It wasn't fun when I was doing it, but to map out my certification path, because what's really important for me, I'll click this while it's doing it because it's a bit of a build. What was important for me was it's not about doing one track unless you want to. So I started in DCV because way back when in 2007, there wasn't CMA track or anything else like that. But I've jumped around from DCV to CMA to NV, back to CMA, back to DCV. And so I've moved laterally rather than going up and down the stack. And so it looks a bit like my 6-year-old has scribbled all over my deck, but that's sort of my certification path over the last 14 years. And I'm sort of leveling myself at the VCAX at the moment, not because I couldn't do the VCDX, it's just not for me job relevant right now. So interesting numbers. So, and again, I'm not too sure that we're doing questions because I can't see any, but there are 300, around about 300, last count, around about 350,000 VCPs, which is a large number, and that's global. And then when you move into the VCAP sort of area, there are around about 16,000, give or take. Again, these numbers may be 3 to 6 months old, but I can't see it's significantly changed in that period. When you get to VCIX, so people with 2 certifications in the same track at the same level to get the VCIX, there's only 7,000. So it becomes a bit of an exclusive club when you hit VCDX, because when I checked yesterday, I think it was, there was 294. So lots and lots of people, have VCP. Not so many people move to the VCAP, and I don't know what that barrier to entry is. I don't know if it's a personal barrier to entry. I don't know if it's time commitment. I don't know whether it's just fear of moving to the VCAP level and thinking they're not good enough. Because for me, when I worked in 2007, 2008, probably to about 2010, I had that fear of, actually, I'm not good enough for a VCAP. I'm not good enough to take that exam. I don't think I'll pass it. And it's not it's not a cheap exam to take. But my advice would be is if you can do the VCP and you're using the products, then you're ready for the VCAP. But obviously there's that study involved to make sure. So don't let fear sort of stop you doing it. But as I said, it becomes a very much exclusive club as you get up to top, which is a good thing because you don't, it's the VCDX is a really sort of difficult and long exam and sort of certification to get. And it's something that you need to aspire to. And again, it's not for everybody, but it's definitely something that you should consider. Now, when we look at where VCPs are in the world, and this is available on the sort of VMware Learning blog, but there are 193 countries with VCPs. Various different numbers, obviously, sort of the most is in the US, and looks quite a lot followed sort of in Australia, India, the UK have got quite a few as well. So there are quite a few countries that don't have, but most of the countries in the world have some VCPs. And then when we look at VCAPs, it's again slightly less number of countries. So I know we're talking in the UK right now, and I actually did this presentation to Empower in EMEA, and so it's is there a VCP or a VCAP in your country? Could you be VCAP #1 in your country? And that's sort of some prestige in itself. But when we look at those numbers, 4,000 in the US, about 800 in the UK, about 460 in Australia, Canada. I'm going to stop my geography knowledge there, but again, quite a few numbers spread relatively in the same sort of way as the VCP numbers, but obviously less countries there. So, how would you prepare for an exam? What can you expect? What topics are covered? And essentially, what do we do to prepare? And again, this is very much down to your own way of doing things, but hopefully the next few slides will give you sort of some tips on that. So what can you expect from an exam? And again, increasing level of difficulty from VCTA up to VCAP, sort of design and deploy. And I haven't put the design and deploy in any particular order. It really depends. I don't find the design harder than the deploy, sort of equal weighting, really. It really depends on whether you're an administrative in your day-to-day job or you're an architect in your day-to-day job, which you will find easier. But VCTA, VCP, VCAP. And really, from a VCTA perspective, you will get remember what we class as remember and understand type questions, and maybe even just remember type questions. Can you remember what this is? From the documentation, from the courses you might have been on, do you know what this is? You don't necessarily have to understand it all the time or sort of know the ins and outs of the product for that, but you just know what this thing is. And you'll get multiple choice questions. So it's normally out of sort of 4 answers or 5 or 6 answers, you have to choose a number out of that. From a VCP perspective, again, it's remember, but more around the understand. Do I remember what I've read? And do I understand what that means in the context of a scenario or of this question? And again, multiple choice based questions with sort of either 1, 2, or 3 normally correct answers. But what you will get in the VCP is you'll start to see scenario based questions. So you might see a little bit of text that gives you some context around the question, and then they'll ask you a question. So this administrator wants to create a private cloud or wants to deploy vCenter. How does he do this? Or this particular feature. And so you will need to read the scenario, understand what it's asking you, and then be able to answer the question. When you get to the VCAP design level of questions, that turns into an analyze and apply style question. There still are some remember and understand questions in there. There's some sort of starter questions, simpler questions, if you like. But it's very much a read the scenario, analyze what it's trying to tell you, because it won't give you all the information. You have to make sort of judgment based on your knowledge, and then apply what you know, having read the documentation, been on the training courses, apply what you know to answer the question. Now, when I took my first design exam, there was drag and drop sort of Visio style diagrams, and those don't exist. There may be still some sort of artifacts, but they're not drag and drop, not click and connect or anything like that. So it's all very much multiple choice. You might be asked a question based on a picture, but you haven't got a drag and drop connect to the picture. And again, most of the VCAP design exam is around scenarios. It is about, do you understand how to design a solution based on this information we're giving you? Do you know the differences between your sort of risks, issues, assumptions, dependencies, the difference between functional and non-functional requirements, and all that sort of thing? And again, this is all in the blueprint, which we'll come to in a second. But you really need to sort of know your stuff from a design perspective. And it can be really difficult from an administrative point of view to take a step back and think about the design of a system when you're in sort of the UI trying to do things. So it can be a difficult exam for those sort of pure administrative tasks, but it's a career progression potentially. If you want to go to that BCDX, you have to sort of take a step back and think about the design. When you get to VCAP deploy, and again, design and deploy depend on which way you want to do them. Again, analyze and apply. Task-based sort of questions. And it's a hands-on lab style exam. So you go in, you use the interface like you would in a hands-on lab, and you read the question and you have to do the task. It could be, trying to think of a question without giving away too much. It could be that you've got to deploy a virtual machine. Way too simple. That's not going to happen. But you've got to deploy this machine on this particular network. But that particular network may not exist. So you may have to go and create the network to be able to deploy the virtual machine. So they ask you some question, or they ask you the question, but they won't necessarily give you all of the answer. because you're going to try and deploy that machine. Oh, it won't be in the list. Why is it not in the list? Let's go and have a look at the network. Oh, the network doesn't exist. I've got to create that. Oh, they're giving me the VLAN ID I need to use, so on and so forth. So that's sort of, you build it up from the question, but very much sort of task-based. But actually, when you think about the number of questions in a VCTA, a VCP, and a VCAP design, they are far more than the VCAP deploy. I think the CMA has sort of less than, the CMA deploy has less than like 20 questions. So whereas the sort of VCP has sort of 60, 70, 80 questions, depending on the VCP you're sort of asking. So, but you also get a lot more time. You get sort of like 200 odd minutes to do the VCAP deploy, because tasks can take time, and getting the results on those tasks can take time. So that's sort of the sort of things you'd expect to see in an exam. What sort of topics are covered? So when you read the blueprint, is, if you take anything from this session today, apart from my lovely salt comp t-shirt, read the blueprint. That is the biggest lesson you can learn from today. So we split all of the exams typically into 7 sections: architecture technologies, product and solution, planning and design, install configure manage, or install configure setup, sorry, performance tuning optimization, troubleshooting repairing, administrative tasks, and operational tasks. And so as you'll see, for example, the VCTA, you'll need to understand a little bit about the architecture, nothing too in depth. You'll need to sort of know some of the bits about maybe installing some stuff or configuring, using user interface to configure stuff. And then most of those questions will be on operational tasks. But they're not user interface memorization questions. We are trained to not do that sort of question. There may be the odd one that falls through the gaps, but majority of the exams, because user interface memorization is a really bad way of sort of testing someone's knowledge, we steer way clear from those. In the VCP, again, some more advanced sort of architectural and technologies sort of questions, product and solutions. How do they interact with each other? So how does the VMware SDDC act with the vRealize suite, as an example, or how does it act with Horizon, or how does Horizon act with VROPS, and so on and so forth. So you'll get may get those sort of style questions. Again, installation and configuration and setup, slightly more in depth, and maybe more installing and configuring than just configuring. You get to do that sort of performance tuning again, based on remembering and understanding. You haven't actually got to do anything, but what happens? How do you troubleshoot a failed disk in a vSAN cluster, as an example, or how do you troubleshoot a failed deployment in a vRealize automation scenario, depending on the exam you're doing. And then administrative and operational tasks as well. Again, more in depth administrative and operational tasks. VCAP design, as you'll see, has nothing about install, configure, performance tuning, troubleshooting, and administrative tasks, because it's a design exam. It's scenarios. You're speaking to customers, or the scenarios around customer wanting to do something. Again, gather requirements, document requirements, know the differences between assumptions, risks, issues, dependencies, constraints. Know the difference between a functional and a non-functional requirement. Physical sort of design decision and a conceptual design. And that sort of thing is where you're looking at on the design perspective. And then on the flip side, the deploy exam is all about what you can do: install, configure, manage, performance, troubleshoot, administrative tasks. How do I create a user? How do I add a local user? How do I create a virtual desktop pool? That sort of stuff will be in the sort of deploy exam. So how should you prepare for an exam? So the blueprint is the definitive source of what will be on that exam. And what's really important when you go to the blueprint is it should tell you what version of the product that you need to worry about, because there are some exams that, and before I joined the educational team, I was like, why is the product out and there isn't an exam? I know I understand the process and the time and effort it takes for anything up to 15 SMEs at a time to write an exam. So I understand why it takes so much time to do that and why they're not out when the product drops. But the definitive source is the blueprint. The blueprint will tell you what version of product that you're going against. It could be, for example, in the CMA blueprint, it may be 8.1, it may be 8.2, maybe 8.3. But we tend to try and make the questions as generic as possible against version 8 in that example. We don't necessarily want to talk about a feature in 8.1 that may be deprecated in 8.2 because we know it's deprecated in 8.2. So there is some intelligence behind the way we write those questions, and there shouldn't be too many questions that are specific to versions. I think the only real thing there would be from a VCP perspective, when you're asking upgrade questions on a sort of data center, then obviously you have to be specific about which version you're going from and to, as an example. But reading the blueprint, understanding the topics, identify those gaps in your knowledge that you don't have. And when I did my NSX VCAP deploy exam, I wrote a whole blog article, a set of blog articles about it, still available on my blog, because whilst I could do the VCP stuff, I wanted to make sure I could do the deploy sort of elements, and so I took the blueprint as gospel, if you like, or as a document that I had to follow, and wrote articles based on what I thought I would be asked in each of those topics, so that I learned how to do them, and then it allowed other people to learn at the same time. So 2, training. Training is always beneficial. Now, for a VCP exam, as I sort of mentioned earlier, you will need to have taken an exam to a certified training course on the list, again detailed in the blueprint, and on the sort of VMware website, educational website, to be able to have that VCP certification. Now, you can still take the exam, but you don't get the credit for the certification until you've taken the course. So you might take the exam up front, you might take the course up front. It's entirely up to you, but you won't get the VCP until you've done both. Now, I've put ICM training there. There are other options. So ICM, install, configure, manage. There are other options there as well, but they tend to be install, configure, manage style courses. And you may even be able to do some of those on demand as well. So it's worth checking each of the blueprints and the certification websites to see, especially in the current times, whether or not you have to go into a classroom or do that live online, or whether you need to do it on demand, or whether you can do it on demand, should I say. Now, advanced training from a VCAP perspective is always recommended. It really depends on what you're doing. So as an example, the VCAP CMA design covers automation, operations, log insight, identity manager, lifecycle manager. So if you're really great at vRealize automation, you don't need to go on the vRealize automation course necessarily. You might need to go on a vRealize operations course, so that you can identify those gaps and get those. So always recommended, but not required from that perspective. I personally don't think you can pass an exam without doing some study. And it's not about passing. For me, it's not about passing. I don't want to get 98%. I want to get the pass mark or a little bit above that. Otherwise, I've spent too much time studying. If you like, you need to do. It's the bare minimum pass you go for. If you can get a higher pass, great. But don't study so much that you want to hit 98% all the time. VMware documentation is key. Most of the exam blueprint, and again in the blueprint, you'll see the links to the documentation that we've used to write the questions. Home lab can be really important, but not essential. Hands-on lab can be really important, and it probably essential if you don't have a home lab, because with hands-on lab, you can log in, you can start a hands-on lab, you can close the manual, full size the screen, just do what you like to the environment, and then when you're finished, end it, and it just gets wiped away, and then you can start it again. Publications, so books or VMware cloud articles. We again tend to have to source everything as well. So again, lots and lots of detail out there, and anything that we've used to write the questions, or the exam topics will be in the blueprint. Again, read the blueprint. It gives you the sources of information we've used to build those exams, because we have to say, we've written this question, here's the reference we've used for the answer. So if that's in the blueprint, then it's pretty sure that you need to understand what is telling you on that page. So practice. VCAP deploy, practice in the hands-on labs. Get hands-on. Think about command line options, API options. Because it's not just these days. It's not just about user interface. It's about how do we do this on the API level? How do we do this with command lines? And then the VCAP design. It's a bit more difficult to practice. I think there are some sort of practice sites out there. I'm not talking about what I would class as brain dumping sites. Completely go away from those. It's just not worth it. It doesn't teach you anything. You don't learn anything. It is not worth A, the risk of being found out of cheating and losing your certifications, and B, it doesn't make you a better person to know all the answers from the exam to get there. It just means you've paid some money to get a piece of paper, and actually you will be found out as you go along because you don't know the information. You just can answer the questions. But I think there are some sort of reputable sites out there, some from the experts' perspective, that will give you some sort of design scenario style questions, and it's worth looking at those and seeing those. Set a date in your diary that is far enough ahead that you can do your preparation and do your study and stick to it. I'm terrible at this because actually I set a Microsoft exam recently, and then I kept putting it back because of work, and eventually that exam got retired. That's how long I was putting it back for, and now I can't take the exam. So set a date in the future, stick to it, but be realistic. If you're really busy for the next 6 months, don't book it for 6 months. Book it in 9 months' time. If you're going to be, over Christmas not doing anything, you might want to book it in January. You want to do some study over Christmas, do some study over Christmas. It really depends. But think not only your work-life balance, but also your work as well. And again, if you're doing this stuff day to day, then that actually might help you as well. So exam taking technique. It's interesting because look, I still get that, even though I've taken 20 odd exams, I still get that fear when I start the exam. You sit down, you press accept or okay, you read the terms and conditions, you press okay, and then the exam starts. And then you suddenly think, sweaty fingers, and you think, oh, actually, can I do this? And you have to think because you have a number of questions that you have to answer in a certain period of time. For a VCAP exam, 60 questions for the DCV design, and you have 150 minutes to do that. That's 2.5 minutes a question. For the DCV deploy, 17 or so questions, 205 minutes. You get about 12 minutes. But, quite a lot of people still run out of time. You think, 12 minutes a question, that's loads of time. No, it's not. VCAP deploy, 12 or 13 questions I think it is now. You get 205 minutes. Loads of time. No, it's not. It's one of those techniques that you have to think about. And it's really important because the only way you're going to get through the exam is not to panic. The only way you're going to not to panic is to have an exam taking technique. And so before you take the exam, you need to decide on that technique. Now, personally, I have, when it comes to VCPs or design exams, I take the iterative approach. If I can't answer the question within the first 30 seconds, I move on. And I do that to the end of the exam, and then I start again. And once I've knocked off, 75% of the questions, I can then spend a little bit more time on the questions that I don't know. And that means that I've answered all the questions, because when I started taking the exams, I would get fixated on, I've got to answer each question in order. and I'd spend lots and lots of time answering these really, really difficult questions. And then by the end of the exam, there'll be like 4 or 5 questions that were really easy that I don't have time to answer. So I'd rather go through the whole exam and know exactly what questions are, tick off the ones I can really quickly answer, then come back to the ones that are going to take me a little bit longer, because I've only got 2.5 minutes per question for the design exam. So decide on that approach up front. It's different for whether you're doing a VCP to a design exam to a deploy exam. Review each question carefully. So make sure you read the question, make sure you sort of understand it. And again, if I can't understand what they're asking me, because it's a topic I might be a little bit fuzzy on, I move on. Because I'd rather answer 75% correct and then decide how I'm going to answer those last 25%. Again, time box. So if I know I've got 2.5 minutes, or I know I'm going to give myself 30 seconds to answer the questions, I'm going to sort of keep an eye on the clock, and then if I can't answer that question, move on. And again, really big problem for the VCAP NSX deploy exam was I ran out of time, and I ran out of time on the first design exam I took. I ran out of time. The very first one, the VCAP DCD. Keep track of the questions. You get a pad, normally a white clean pad with a pen. I mark the questions down 1 to 60. Just mark them off as you're doing them, so not only do I flag it on the tool, but I mark them off on the piece of paper as well, so I know that I've done it. And if it's a topic, if I can remember to write a very brief, one or 2 words about the topic, then I know where those questions are when I want to go back to them, rather than have to keep cycle through. One of the biggest things to remember on the VCAP exam for a deploy perspective is you'll be asked to do maybe 2 or 3 things, and partial answers also score you points. So yes, it's lovely if you can answer every question to its full end and you get every point, but don't skip a question. If you can answer, there's 3 points in that question, and you can answer like the first 2, but can't do the last one, answer the first 2, because you may get 75% of the points. If there's 4 points for the question, you might be getting 75% of those points right, and the 25% okay you won't get, but you're still getting 3 points that you wouldn't have got in the first place. So very important to answer those questions if you can, even in partial. So what's next? Unfortunately, you're either going to, hopefully you're going to pass. Unfortunately, you're 50% chance, you're going to fail. And so what do you do? How do you cope with that? And again, this is just me sort of giving you the ideas that I think about, but the journey is individual. So, I think in my head, I passed the exam, celebrate, maybe even a dance break. If I'm doing a VCAP, have I got my VCIX by doing that? If I haven't, is it a VCAP that I've done? If it's not the VCAP design, have I done deploy? What do I want to do next? If I've done VCAP but don't want to progress any further, do I actually want to go to a different track? Have I done the VCP, the VCP for the data center virtualization, done the VCAP design because I'm an architect, and actually because I do a lot of cloud management, I might decide actually I want to do the VCP for cloud management and the design for cloud management, and then I'll come back and do the deploys if I want to. So it's really down to your own decision and the journey that you're on. Don't get pressured into doing anything that you don't want to do. Don't get pressured into thinking, the VCDX. If I don't get my VCDX, then I'm a failure. That's not the case. But if you do want to do VCDX, make sure again you look at the blueprint. You get yourself a mentor and you start working on that design as well, because those sort of 3 things are really important. The mentor can be the difference for some people, the difference between pass and fail, because mentors have been there, they've done it. They can give you sort of that guidance. They can't necessarily tell you what to say or the answers, because I don't think there really is an answer. It's very situational, but they can sort of coach you in how to answer or sort of respond to some of the questions you might get. And they can review your design, point out things that you might want to tweak in your design. Very important from a VCDX point of view to have a mentor, in my view. But if you don't want to do VCDX, again, you can switch to specialist exam, VROP specialist, HANZU specialist, lots of different other exams that you can do if you want to carry on doing that sort of exam pathway. Now, as I said, unfortunately, not everybody passes first time. I haven't. There's some exams that I haven't passed first time. I think what's really important is don't let that failure define you. It's important to learn from those mistakes, learn from the exam, and then you only really fail if you decide not to take it again. So I sort of tend to follow this process. I review as soon as I'm out of that exam. If I failed, or if it's a deploy exam and I don't know whether I failed straight away, then I'll sit there and I'll work out, what the questions are, or remember what the questions are. If not the questions, verbatim, then the type of questions or the topics that were covered. I should be able to remember those, having just spent 2 or 3 hours doing that. I then reinforce the topics I didn't know well enough by doing more study. Not only reinforce the stuff you do know, but learn the stuff that you didn't sort of do quite as well on. And because it's likely that topics like that are going to come up again. There's only a limited bank of questions. So it may be that they come up again. It may be that something similar comes up, and at least you've got that idea. One thing to note on that review section is that you're under NDA. So you can't really go and talk to other people about the questions. You can't share them on Twitter, share them on your blog. Keep that internal because it's just not worth it. So once you've done that study, practice more. Practice the stuff that you can't do as well as the stuff that you can do. Because the last thing you want to do is go into an exam knowing all the stuff you couldn't do, but forgetting the stuff that you could do previously. And then when you're ready, take it again. As I said, you only really fail when you decide not to retry. But it's an expensive. When we get to VCAPs, it's an expensive exam to fail more than once. So you want to try. If you don't get it the first time, make sure you get it the second time. And now there are reasons why people fail. Bad test centers in terms of connectivity and so on and so forth. But if it's purely down to you just didn't know the topic, then study more, take the exam. And to be honest, I would rather fail miserably than fail close. So I would rather say get a 200 rather than a 497 because that's just one question away. Cognizant of the time. So let's quick forward. So key takeaways: read the blueprint. It is the single source of truth. Certification journey. It's your own journey, and don't feel pressured by anybody. Work-life balance is important. VCAP isn't for everybody. It's an elite certification for a reason. Not everybody wants to go that far. Maybe not now, maybe in the future, but don't feel pressured to do that. Certifications aren't relevant for everybody. They're not for everybody. Is it job relevant? You have to ask yourself. Is it going to enhance my career? Or is it just an interest and a hobby? Because you will change the way that you look at certifications and the amount of time you want to put to them, answering those questions. Certification exams are there to test, not trick. So when we write questions, it's not about tricking you to choosing the wrong answer. We have to make those answers difficult in terms of what we don't want is someone to go, I don't know the topic, but I know it's not going to be those two. So it must be that one. So we have to give you a difficult time, if you like, but we're not there to trick you in small word changes that might mean double negatives or whatever like that. We're very careful about the way we write our questions. Study smart, not hard. So again, identify the stuff that you don't know and don't know well, and concentrate on that. But whilst reinforcing the stuff you do know, but make a plan and stick to it. And again, set a realistic timetable and stick to it. Don't worry about everybody else. Don't worry about how quickly they're doing certifications or they're doing exams. You're on that journey and you'll get there. Finally, read the blueprint. Again, any questions? I don't know if we're doing questions, to be honest, but that is all from me.